I've spent probably the last 5 or 6 years grappling with the challenge of implementing a SOX compliant internal control framework in a multinational organization. So, I think, up front there, we identified that IT general controls, or ITGC, around EBS, that was going to be, one, if not the major challenge. In particular, as sort of alluded to before, segregation of duties, user provisioning, user recertification, things like how we keep track of and monitor significant configuration changes, sensitive changes in the system. So a whole array of control topics around around EBS that we identified as complex problems that that we needed to solve. And I suppose maybe I'd highlight sort of 5 or 6 kind of key learnings from my perspective, and I'm talking here as the as the project sponsor for the whole of the the whole of the piece of work around internal control framework in preparation for the listing. And maybe it's worth saying that whilst a lot of my work was focused on the the requirements needed to comply with with US SOX, I think the learnings are applicable to any organization who is going through an internal control transformation program, not just applicable to US SOX. And there are many other territories in the world that are looking at corporate governance in this area. In the UK, a lot of some people may be aware, a lot of proposals around a UK SOX type regime coming up. So I think everything we're talking about today is equally applicable. I think so for me, a couple of key learnings. One is around stakeholder management. There's a large number of stakeholders involved in any kind of internal control program. The IT team themselves, end users, process owners, information security, internal audit, external audit. Don't underestimate the the time and effort that's required in terms of collaborating and working with those individuals, because the more that you can get alignment of your work, the more you can deliver a program that can hit not the needs of users, the needs of the internal control community, the needs of information security professionals, cyber professionals. The more you can work collaboratively and get one framework that hits all of those requirements, the better. But it does take time and it does take effort to get that alignment. Secondly, on a similar theme, I would mention the external auditors here. So a lot of your work, particularly around ERPs, are going to be your work is going to be used by an external auditor if they wish to rely on internal controls, and that is one of the big paybacks of investment in a program, around internal control. But in my experience, don't assume that the external auditor will know everything about a GRC tool. Don't assume that an external auditor will know your ERP in depth as a subject matter expert. You also need to spend time with them, walking them through what you're doing from a risk perspective, what you're doing from a controls perspective. Educate them about how you're doing it, and talk to them about some of the choices that you might be making, particularly around how you define your segregation of duties, what roles you're identifying as particularly sensitive or privileged, what things you are monitoring through through alarms or through alerts, because they will have some views on what they consider is important. So spend the time with them up front, going through your decision-making process, and that will maximize their ability to leverage your work, their ability to rely, and ultimately that is part of the payback for the investment in terms of time and effort. Thirdly, give yourself plenty of time for this work. If you've got hard deadlines, such as a listing, such as a year end coming up, or whatever, give yourself time, because to do it properly, to design, test, do lots of dry runs, do lots of pilot testing, there is quite a lead time here, particularly as I mentioned, when you're working with lots of other stakeholders in this environment. So build a realistic timeline around your program, and as I said, give yourself lots of time to pilot test before you absolutely need to rely on on the outputs of a GRC. A very positive one, I would say, and from my experience, was actually that that we actually had unexpected cost savings coming out of the program that we implemented, and how we used SafePaaS. So some cost savings that actually weren't part of the business case, but actually when we went through the process and we looked at using SafePaaS for automating the user process, automating the setup of new users, we actually found some cost savings that we didn't originally expect, in terms of not needing the time and effort from an external help desk as much as we had previously done. And actually those cost savings ended up being quite significant, and as I said, and a real added bonus for us, quite compelling, particularly when talking with talking with the IT team, and talking with the CTI. So that was a real positive positive outcome. And then my final learning as well is don't forget about controls around the GRC platform itself. If you're using a tool such as SafePaaS, that also needs controls around it, around access, around change management. And again, the more you want to rely on the output of this, you want your external auditors to rely on the work you're doing. They will look at the controls around around the GRC itself, and it can be really easily overlooked in the excitement of working through the the core design and implementation. But don't forget about those, otherwise you might be tripped up at the end.